Uncle Lawrence was a tall, thin, ugly old man. I loved him. He would always give me a nickel when we visited, and almost always let me reach into the candy jar and get a whole handful of the seemingly ever-present gumdrops. He wore his pants up over his waist and held them up with suspenders, and I think I never saw him without a tie. I had just started school, sixth grade, and I had just come home from my first full day. It was about 3:30 p.m., and Dad was home already. I thought this odd, in the house, but when in the house, where he, in a grim tone, and looked at me, Uncle Lawrence died this morning. It was pretty clear that Dad had been crying, and he walked over to me and grabbed me to him and held on. I had never faced death before, never felt it, didn't know anybody who had died. I put my arms around Dad and I held him back. That evening, the rest of the family, Mom, Dave, and I, just sat in the living room quietly, kind of looking down at the floor, or at least that was the attitude. Dad had gone to be with Aunt May, Uncle Lawrence's wife, to make the arrangements. When he got home, he and Mom went in the kitchen and talked, and Dave and I went to bed upstairs. I lay there for a long time before drifting off to sleep. 3 days later was the calling, and Mom and Dad dressed up to go to the funeral home. About a half an hour before they were to leave, I asked if I could go too. You could hear a pin drop. Finally, Mom said in a kind of stern voice, "A funeral home is no place for a boy your age. The answer is no." Somehow I knew that Dad just went along not wanting to argue about it. But I thought and finally said, "But how can I say goodbye?" "You can't," she replied. "Remember him in your thoughts." I was incredulous. I just fell into a chair and sat there as they left. Finally, my brother Dave said, "Want to read a comic book to me?" He liked Captain Marvel. I read it, but just the words, not the vicarious adventure of the story. Every time Billy Batson said Shazam and changed into Captain Marvel, Dave would repeat it loudly, Shazam, and somehow, when he did, I would say it to myself, hoping that at least for me, Uncle Lawrence would walk through the door. He never did. I wished I would have been allowed to see his body and look at him and give him a nickel. Years later, as an adult, I visited his grave. It was 1974 when Aunt May died. I went to her funeral and actually did the eulogy. After everyone had left the cemetery, I walked to my car, and just as I got to it, I thought of something. I walked back to the marker and placed a nickel on it. "Thanks, Uncle Lawrence. Let's go get some gumdrops." Aunt May. As I became aware long after her death, my great Aunt May raised my father. She was married to my Uncle Lawrence, and my father, along with his grandmother, who lived with them. Their last name was Laforge, but he was not in any way noticeably, to me, French. They lived on the south side of Indianapolis all their married life and took in my dad to raise. His real mother was off in Chicago playing. When Uncle Lawrence died in 1948, Aunt May came to live with us. There were two bedrooms upstairs. Dave and I had one and she had the other. Only one bathroom in the whole house, and it was downstairs. Looking back on it, it is clear that Mom hated this whole idea, and I suppose Aunt May didn't like it much either, but what's a woman to do? They put up with each other as best they could. The old man was away all day and sometimes all night. Dave and I were in school, so often it was just those two. One kitchen, two women. When Dave and I got home from school about 3:45, you could often cut the tension with a knife. Mom would often shut herself off in her bedroom just to escape, and Aunt May would too. Occasionally Dad's real mom would visit. She was now 50 and had a new husband, her third, not counting the live-ins. She would always ask for meatloaf, Aunt May's specialty. Mom hated it, would not make it, stayed out of the kitchen and fumed. What a hell it was for her. Aunt May too, really. One summer day I went out in the backyard and Aunt May opened her window and gently shouted out to me, "I sure feel like some ice cream. How about going down to Peel's and getting some? Set you up to a dish of cream." She smiled. I thought a minute. She smiled again. "No thanks," I said, and went back to whatever I was doing. I looked up a couple of minutes later to make sure she was gone. She wasn't. She was still in the window, only now she was crying. I acted as though I didn't see her and walked to the alley and down it opposite the way to Peel's. I still, 68 years later, remember only now the forlorn and helpless sadness of her lot sinks in every time. I was rummaging through some old photos and family artifacts the other day, and I conjured up her face again. There she was in the window, long ago. Set you up to a dish of cream.